The great hall of the Ethelgard High Synod did not echo. It was designed to absorb sound, to purify the auditory experience into a singular, crystalline clarity, much like the Empire itself sought to purify the galaxy of chaos and inefficiency. High Exarch Thuln stood before the obsidian viewing pane, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the swirling nebulas of the core systems, his dorsal spines twitching with a mixture of amusement and mild irritation. Behind him, the semicircular array of the council floated on grav discs, their robes of woven light shimmering in the filtered atmospheric glow. They were debating, as they always did, with the melodious hum of a species that had forgotten the visceral terror of survival 1,000 cycles ago. The topic was the Terran Union, a newcomer species from the fringes of the spiral arm, a biological curiosity that had stumbled out of its gravity well with technology so archaic, it seemed almost insulting to the refined sensibilities of the Ethelgard. Thuln turned his gaze from the stars to the holographic projection in the center of the room, a three-dimensional rendering of the disputed border sector where the Terran fleet had finally arrived to answer the Synod's ultimatum. The room rippled with a low, harmonious chittering, the Ethelgard equivalent of polite laughter. On the display, the Terran vessels were represented by jagged, ugly blocks of dull gray, devoid of the elegant curves, the singularity-driven propulsion loops, or the shifting energy matrices that characterized civilized void craft. These human ships were scarred, asymmetrical monstrosities of welded plating and exposed heat sinks, trailing chemical exhaust like wounded beasts bleeding into the vacuum. They were shaped like bricks, like hammers, like tools of blunt trauma. There was no finesse in their design, no understanding of hyperdimensional geometry, only a crude adherence to Newtonian physics that the Ethelgard had surpassed before their first star Dyson was constructed. Sub-Minister Krell, a younger diplomat whose carapace still held the iridescent sheen of molting, gestured toward the hologram with a slender, three-fingered hand. "It is almost pitiable," Krell intoned, his voice a series of melodic clicks. "They bring combustion engines and kinetic mass drivers to a confrontation with the Synod. It is like a primitive bringing a sharpened stick to a supernova. Do they not understand that our shields shift phase with the background radiation of the universe? Do they truly believe these floating scraps of metal pose a threat?" Thuln allowed a ripple of amusement to travel down his spine, though he maintained the stoic posture required of his rank. "They are young, Krell. They have spent their history fighting gravity and each other. They mistake durability for defense. They mistake mass for power. We offered them integration as a client species, a chance to abandon these relics and serve within the lower tiers of the bureaucracy. They refused. They cited sovereignty, a concept usually reserved for species that can actually defend it. The council murmured in agreement. The ultimatum had been clear: surrender the mining rights to the sector and submit to disarmament or be removed. The Terrans had sent a message back, a simple audio transmission that lacked even the basic courtesy of a visual codec. It had said only, "We are holding position. Do not engage." It was the arrogance of the ignorant. The Ethelgard fleet, the 7th Armada of Divine Corrections, was already in position, a formation of golden needles and teardrops of pure white energy, silent and terrifyingly beautiful. Compared to the Terran formation, which looked like a junkyard drifting in formation, it was a tableau of gods against insects. Tension in the room was not born of fear, but of anticipation for the spectacle. It was rare to see a species so spectacularly misunderstand the scale of the power they were defying. Thuln signaled the tactical officer, a drone-linked savant named Vrox, whose consciousness was submerged in the fleet's battlenet. "Open a channel to the Terran flagship," Thuln commanded, his voice projecting smoothly to the floating discs. "Let us give them one final chance to appreciate the absurdity of their position. Perhaps once they see the energy readings of our primary lances, they will understand that their old ships are nothing more than coffins waiting to be sealed." The view screen shifted, replacing the tactical map with static, then a grainy, low-fidelity image of the human bridge. It was dark, illuminated only by the harsh glow of physical monitors and emergency lighting. There were no neural interfaces, no floating holographic data streams. Just men and women in utilitarian gray uniforms, strapped into crash couches, their faces illuminated by the flickering screens. In the center of the image sat a human male, older than the others, his face lined with the stress of biological ag. His hair the color of steel wool. He held a ceramic cup in one hand, steam rising from it in the recycled air. This was Admiral Vance. He did not look up immediately when the channel opened. He was reading a physical tablet, his finger scrolling across the glass surface. The disrespect was palpable. Thuln stiffened. Terran Commander, Thuln spoke, his translator converting the harmonic Ethelgard language into the guttural sounds of Earth standard. You stand before the 7th Armada. Your vessels are obsolete. Your weapons are primitive. We have scanned your hulls. You possess no energy shielding, only layers of dense matter. You are outmatched in every conceivable metric. Power down your drives and prepare to be boarded, or we will vaporize your fleet where it drifts. Vance looked up slowly, taking a sip from his cup. His eyes were dark, tired, but devoid of the panic that usually accompanied a species facing extinction. He placed the cup in a holder and leaned forward, clasping his hands. "High Exarch," Vance said, his voice gravelly and calm, sounding like stones grinding together. "We received your ultimatum. We declined. As for our ships, yes, they are old. The UNS Ironside under my feet was laid down 80 years ago. She's taken hits that would crack a planetoid. You see, we didn't build these ships to fight you. We didn't even know you existed when we welded the first keel." He paused, looking off camera for a moment as if checking a sensor reading. "You rely on energy shields, Exarch, phase-shifting fields that disperse lasers, plasma, and particle beams. Very elegant, very advanced." "We rely on the fundamental laws of the cosmos," Thuln corrected haughtily. "Laws you barely comprehend." "We comprehend them just fine," Vance replied, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We just chose a different set of laws. You see, out where we come from in the dark patches between the arms, there are things that eat energy, things that drain shields like batteries. So we stopped using shields. We went back to armor. Composite layers of tungsten, depleted uranium, and ceramic matrix composites. And we stopped using lasers because they just diffuse over long distances or get refracted. We went back to Sir Isaac Newton." Thuln was confused. The translator struggled with the name, interpreting it as a deity of motion. "You speak in riddles to delay your end. Fire the warning shot," Thuln ordered Vrox, severing the audio link but keeping the visual feed open to watch the humans recoil in terror. In the void, one of the Ethelgard destroyers, a sleek sliver of gold, pulsed with blinding light. A lance of pure thermal energy lashed out, striking the prow of the nearest Terran cruiser, a blocky vessel named the Anvil. The Council watched, expecting the ship to boil away into vapor. The beam struck. The hull of the Anvil glowed cherry red, then white. The outer layers ablated, peeling away in a cloud of superheated gas, dissipating the energy into the vacuum. But the ship did not explode. It did not buckle. Underneath the scorched outer plating, the dark, scarred metal held firm. The Anvil simply absorbed the hit, shook it off, and continued its forward drift. The silence in the High Synod was absolute. A few council members adjusted their robes nervously. "Report," Thuln snapped, his spines rigid. "Why is that vessel not atomized?" "Their armor," Vrox's voice came through, tinged with digital confusion. "It is incredibly dense. It is designed to ablate. It sacrificed the outer layer to disperse the thermal load. They are not shielding against the energy. They are simply enduring it." On the screen, Admiral Vance hadn't even flinched. He pressed a button on his console. "Our turn," he mouthed. The Terran fleet did not light up with energy signatures. There was no buildup of tachyon particles, no singing of warp coils. Instead, the sides of the blocky ships opened, revealing dark, cavernous tubes. Magnetic rails, running the length of the kilometers-long vessels, surged with a momentary spike of electrical current, huge, raw, unrefined power. From the Ironside and her sister ships, projectiles were ejected. They were not beams of light. They were solid slugs of ferrous tungsten, each the size of a shuttlecraft, accelerated to a significant percentage of the speed of light. They were invisible to the naked eye in the vacuum, dark matter against the dark sky, silent and unstoppable. The Ethelgard shields, designed to refract energy frequencies to disperse heat and light, were confused. The combat algorithms registered the incoming projectiles not as weapons fire, but as navigational hazards, debris. But debris did not move at .1 light speed. By the time the Ethelgard tactical computers realized the threat, the physics of the situation had already been decided. The first slug slammed into the shielding of the Ethelgard flagship, the Light of Dawn. The shield flared, trying to phase shift a frequency that didn't exist. The slug was matter, kinetic energy. It punched through the energy barrier as if it were smoke. The impact was catastrophic. The Light of Dawn did not dissolve, it shattered. The slug struck the golden hull with the force of a small asteroid impact. The kinetic transfer liquefied the metal instantly, sending a shockwave through the ship's structure that snapped the delicate gravity spines and shattered the crystal matrices of the warp core. In silence, the pride of the fleet folded in on itself, broken in half by a single dumb piece of metal. Then the others hit. One by one, the sleek, beautiful ships of the Seventh Armada were brutalized. They couldn't stop the rounds. Their delicate hulls, built for speed and aesthetics, crumpled under the barrage. It was a massacre of elegance by brutality. Thuln stared, his mind unable to process the data. The hologram showed red icons, his fleet winking out of existence, replaced by expanding clouds of debris. The humans weren't fighting a war of attrition, they were fighting a war of execution. They are using solid matter, Krell whispered, horror clicking in his throat. They are throwing rocks at us, and we cannot stop them. Adjust shields to deflect physical mass, Thuln roared, losing his composure. We cannot, Vrox cried out. The emitters are not designed for this density. The velocity is too high. The calculations required to intercept kinetic slugs of this magnitude would burn out the cores. We are defenseless against rocks. On the screen, Vance was speaking again, though the audio had to be manually re-engaged by a shaking technician. Warned you, Exarch. These old ships were built to kill things that don't care about your shields. Stand down. Power down your weapons, or the next volley targets your orbital habitats. And we won't aim for the hulls. We'll crack the atmospheric domes. Thuln fell back onto his gravity disk, his legs giving way. The Seventh Armada was gone, in minutes. The old ships hadn't even raised a defense field. They had simply taken the hits and punched back harder. It was a humiliation so profound it threatened to collapse the social order of the Synod. Surrender, Thuln whispered, the word tasting like ash. Signal the surrender. The transition from the chaos of the battle, if such a one-sided event could be called a battle, to the diplomatic aftermath was a blur of bureaucratic panic. The Terran fleet moved into a holding orbit around the Ethelgard homeworld, their ugly, scarred hulls hanging in the sky like ominously dark moons. They blocked the sun, casting long shadows over the crystal spires of the capital. Shuttles descended, not the sleek gliders of the Synod, but heavy, boxy dropships that roared with chemical rockets, polluting the pristine air with hydrocarbons. Admiral Vance walked into the High Synod chamber an hour later, flanked by 4 soldiers in power armor that looked as archaic and brutal as their ships. Thick plates, hydraulic servos, heavy ballistic rifles. They walked with a heavy thud of weight, ignoring the delicate anti-grav flooring. Vance took the center of the room, refusing the floating disc offered to him. He stood on his own 2 feet, looking up at the floating counselors. Thuln, now humbled, descended to meet him at eye level, a gesture of submission that had not been performed in 10,000 years. You have defeated us, Thuln said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and genuine curiosity. Your strategy was unexpected, barbaric, but effective. You have proven that the old ways still hold power. It wasn't about old ways or new ways, Vance said, his voice echoing in the silent hall. It was about the right tool for the job. You people have lived in a garden for too long. You pruned the weeds, you manicured the lawns, and you forgot that outside the garden the wolves don't care about aesthetics. We will cede the border sector, Thuln said quickly. We will pay reparations. We acknowledge the Terran Union as a martial power. Vance shook his head, a slow, weary movement. Keep the sector. We don't want it. We didn't come here to conquer you, and we certainly didn't come here to steal your mining rights. The council murmured in confusion. Then why, Krell asked, stepping forward, why the fleet, why the refusal to submit, why the slaughter? Vance sighed, and for the first time he looked truly old. He tapped a command into his wrist computer, and the central hologram of the chamber shifted. It no longer showed the local system. It zoomed out, past the Ethelgard borders, past the Terran space, out to the dark, empty void between the galaxy and its nearest satellite cluster. We didn't build the Ironside and her sisters to fight you, Vance repeated. We built them because of this. The hologram displayed a waveform. It was a chaotic, screeching pattern of static that seemed to eat the light around it. 50 years ago, Vance began his voice dropping to a hush that drew every alien ear in the room. We found an ancient listening post on Mars, pre-human. It was pointed at the dark space. It was warning us. There is something moving out there. A hive, a swarm, a consciousness. We don't have a name for it yet, but we know what it does. It feeds on high-energy signals. It tracks warp signatures. It eats shield emissions. Thuln felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. It eats energy. Exactly, Vance said. The more advanced you are, the brighter you shine to them. Your shields, your prancy energy weapons, your warp gates, they are a dinner bell. We realized that if we wanted to survive, we had to go dark. We had to build ships that run cold. We had to build weapons that don't emit energy signatures until impact. We built the old ships because they are the only things that will be invisible to what's coming. The revelation struck the council like a physical blow. Their entire civilization, built on the mastery of energy, on the brightness of their technology, was essentially a beacon inviting destruction. They had laughed at the humans for crawling in the mud, not realizing the humans were digging trenches. "We came here," Vance continued, "not to take your land, but to stop you from ringing the bell. Your expansion into that sector, it was too loud. You were projecting high-frequency warp fields right into the path of the swarm. We tried to warn you diplomatically, but you wouldn't listen to primitives. So we had to shut you up." Thone looked at the human with new eyes. The blocky armor, the crude projectile weapons, the chemical rockets, it wasn't regression. It was adaptation. It was a survival strategy evolved from a fear far greater than any political dispute. The humans weren't the barbarians at the gate. They were the guardians standing in the mud, holding the line against the dark. What happens now?" Thone asked. His arrogance completely evaporated, replaced by the terrifying realization of his own vulnerability. Vance signaled his guards, who lowered their weapons. "Now," the Admiral said, "we teach you how to throw rocks, we teach you how to turn off the lights, because the signal from the void has stopped repeating Exarch. That means they've stopped broadcasting and started hunting. They're coming." The atmospheric tension in the room shifted from political fear to existential dread. The Ethelguard looked at their glowing robes, their shimmering walls, their floating discs, and saw them for what they were, tinder awaiting a spark. And in the center of the room, the gray, unwashed, heavy-booted human stood like a monolith of stone, the only thing solid enough to weather the storm. "We will learn," Thone said, bowing low, his dorsal spines flattening in submission. "We will silence our cities, we will plate our ships in iron, we will listen." Vance nodded, turning back toward the exit. "Good. Get your engineers to the Ironside in the morning, and bring coffee, real coffee. We have a lot of work to do." As the humans marched out, the heavy thud of their boots on the pristine floor sounded different to the High Synod. It no longer sounded like the clumsy steps of a primitive ape. It sounded like the heartbeat of the galaxy, slow, steady, and ready for war. The Ethelguard looked to the stars, not with the arrogance of masters, but with the fearful scrutiny of prey, grateful for the predators that walked among them, the ones who knew that sometimes, to survive the future, you had to resurrect the brutality of the past. The lights in the great hall dimmed, not for dramatic effect, but for the first time out of necessity. The age of light was over. The age of iron had begun.